Chapter 401, Divine Epiphany, Backland, in a basement that resembled a temple. Mr. A, dressed in a hooded black robe, motionlessly quietly knelt in front of a figurine of the hanged giant for an extended period of time. Suddenly, he pricked up his ears as if he was listening to something. After a short pause, Mr. A's hands jerked up, and he snapped his right index finger with his left palm. He stuffed the bloody finger into his mouth and munched on it like he was eating snacks, making crunching sounds. Gulp! Mr. A's throat wiggled, and he swallowed his gnawed fingers into his stomach. His body suddenly trembled, as if he was being grabbed and shaken by an invisible figure. In this state, Mr. A stretched out his right hand and used the blood from his wound to write words on the ground. Those words were written in neither Jotun or Dragonese, which could stir the powers of nature, nor was it in Hermes, which was used for sacrificial rituals. Instead, they were written in the most ordinary and commonplace language, Loan. The scarlet color quickly gathered together, and the words pieced together into a few sentences. So a compagnie. Find. The fool that doesn't belong to this era. The mysterious ruler above the gray fog. The king of yellow and black, who wields good luck. Adorers and devotees in Backland. After the end of the divine epiphany, Mr. A stopped trembling, and a new finger grew out of his squirming wound. He lowered his head and carefully read the words he had just written, the corners of his mouth curled up in the shadows. Mr. A humbly prostrated as though he had found the meaning of his existence once again.
By your divine revelation.
City of Silver, at the top of the spire. Lavia walked to the window and looked down at the candlelight in the darkness, her expression softening. After an unknown period of time, she heard a knock at the door. Lavia turned around with alacrity and greeted the visitor with a smile.
Your Excellency?
The door opened backward automatically. The person standing outside was none other than demon hunter Colin Iliad. He was draped with a brown coat and a leather belt with secret compartments around his waist. Colin described plainly.
Lovia, the abnormality of the exploratory team has been verified. As captain, regardless of your condition, you have to stay in the dungeon for 3 days and undergo the Glory Crown's cleansing. You should know that this is the rule.
Lovia didn't show the slightest hint of anger as she calmly smiled.
I know, I've already made preparations to stay in the dungeon for a long time. When it's over, I can accept any arrangements, even if you guys still don't trust me.
As she spoke, she had walked to the door and went past Demon Hunter Colin while facing him. Colin turned silently and followed her down the winding steps. Halfway there, they heard heart-wrenching cries and shouts. Lovia asked with a slightly confused expression.
Is it starting again?
Colin nodded and replied in a low voice.
Yes, this is a destiny that we can't escape from.
At this moment, in a large hall, in the middle levels of the spire, the members of the exploratory team and the few residents of the City of Silver who had been corrupted were pressed down to the ground by seemingly corporeal holy lusters. They were unable to move, as though they were carrying a huge mountain on their backs. A couple in their 40s with dark skin held a sword with complicated patterns as they walked up to a young man in his early 20s. The young man's body had already turned into a meat slush, but his head was still intact. Only a long, thin, blood-red tendril grew out of it. Seeing the couple approaching, he shouted in horror.
Dad, Mom, what are you doing? Didn't we agree to eat grilled iron scorpions together tonight? Dad, Mom, I caught a lot of iron scorpions for you.
The couple couldn't bear it any longer and turned their heads to the side, but they raised the sword in their hands high into the air. After 2 stabbing sounds rang out, the young man stopped his wailing. He twitched first, then he completely lost all signs of life. Elsewhere, a young girl, who was around 10 years old, raised a sword with complicated patterns on it. Tears were streaming down her face as she stabbed her elder sister. The girl lying on the ground suddenly laughed and gently said,
From today onwards, you'll have to live your own life. Don't be naive anymore.
The girl immediately cried until her vision turned into a blur, and the sword in her hand stopped in mid-air. However, a strong palm pressed the back of her hand, pushing it forward.
Oof!
The girl was left stunned, as though she couldn't hear or see anything. This was the ancient curse that everyone in the City of Silver was under. They had to kill their own blood relatives to prevent them from turning into terrifying and strange evil spirits after their deaths. Therefore, even though Dark had completely mutated into a monster and was corrupted by an unknown existence, having no value in interrogating, the Shadow Observer didn't dare to kill him on the spot. Instead, he tried his best to restrain the monster and bring it back to the spire to wait for his parents. Otherwise, the situation would only become worse. The exploratory team members were currently receiving the same treatment that they had been subjected to, a process that remained unchanging for more than 2,000 years. Although no one knew if they would mutate after dying in this state, no one dared to gamble on it. Fortunately, the City of Silver didn't have a large population, and all of them lived in the same area. Under the arrangements of the upper echelons for each generation, there were quite a few people who were related to each other by blood. Even if they were limited by 3 generations, they would still be able to find quite a few. Because of this, the Beyonder in charge of setting up a patrol team would first have to consider the matter of blood ties in order to prevent any unexpected situations from occurring. The requirements for exploratory teams weren't that strict, because their missions were always to invade deep into the darkness and stay far away from the City of Silver. Even if they died or mutated, it wouldn't affect everyone's safety. Once a resident no longer had blood relatives within 3 generations, they would be placed under strict surveillance, and as soon as he became seriously ill or visibly aged, he would be exiled into the depths of darkness, away from the City of Silver. When the previous captain of the exploratory team, Udal, was isolated in the dungeon, there were actually 3 elders in the spire. However, the one who took action was Chief Colin Iliad in the end. Otherwise, they could only attempt a seal. This was because Udal was the elder brother of his direct kin. Shepherd Lovia and demon hunter Colin silently entered the bottom level of the spire. Accompanied by a few Dawn Paladins, they arrived at the depths of the dungeon. Soon, both of them stopped outside a cell. The Dawn Paladins dispersed themselves a distance away. Without any abnormalities, she walked into a room with a single bed, a table, and a single candle at a moderate pace. Before the metal door closed, she turned around and looked at Demon Hunter Colin with her pale gray eyes.
Your Excellency, you once told me that when residents of the City of Silver leave this place and die in the depths of the darkness, they won't immediately turn into evil spirits. A few days have to pass. Therefore, the other members of the exploratory team have plenty of time to pull open a distance from them.
Colin nodded and expressed his agreement. Lovia closed her eyes, revealing a sad smile.
In an exploration 2 months ago, a team member died in front of me. I pretended to be separated from the rest of the team. I waited there for 5 days, but he didn't turn into an evil spirit.
Demon Hunter Colin looked at her in silence, not saying anything until the metal door closed with a clang, and the seal took shape. In the ancient palace above the fog. After waiting for a while, Klein was finally relieved when he saw that there were no changes to the crimson star, which symbolized Little Sun.
He should have succeeded.
He rubbed his temples, wrapped his spirituality around his body, and descended back to the real world. As soon as he felt the presence of his body, Klein experienced the bitter cold. He sneezed, then he quickly removed the wall of spirituality and crawled back into bed. Sadly, his bed was already ice cold.
Fortunately, my body receives a certain degree of protection after entering the gray fog. Otherwise, I would probably catch a cold tomorrow.
Klein wrapped himself tightly with his blanket and sighed. The current state he was in reminded him of a joke he had heard in his previous life.
Warmth is basically gained by vibration.
Before his bed warmed up again, he could only let his mind wander as he thought about all sorts of matters.
Yes, there are no pressing matters for me recently. The magician's principles have been concluded. Even if I don't challenge the impossible and only engage in acting normally, I should be able to digest the potions around New Year's. My next task is to collect the Beyonder ingredients for the Faceless Potion and save up the necessary funds. but that's not something I can rush.
The taut strings in Klein's mind gradually softened, and he suddenly had the thought of resting for 2 to 3 days. As the bed warmed, he fell asleep without realizing it. When he woke up, he heard the church bells ringing 8 times. Klein stretched out his arm, felt the cold, and silently withdrew it.
It seems to have turned colder again today. Since there's nothing pertinent to do, it seems I can just continue sleeping in.
Relaxed, he closed his eyes again, but after a while he heard his stomach growling and felt the bulge in his lower abdomen.
Life is full of hard choices,
Klein mumbled. After 10 minutes or so of struggling between the two feelings, he finally gave up, got up, and rushed to the bathroom next door. After changing his clothes and washing up, he went down to the first floor and took out some ingredients to cook Pfannepotter noodles. This time he didn't intend to use the meat sauce that he bought, but instead, he wanted to try the meat paste he had made 2 days ago. This was the meat paste he had carefully chosen from the ingredients based on his memories. Although there were ultimately differences in the ingredients between the two worlds, preventing him from fully replicating the authentic taste, Klein still found it pretty good after sampling it. It wasn't long before he had a bowl of Pfannepotter noodles with condiments and meat paste. He found it a really wonderful morning. Keeping in with the tradition of this world, he browsed through the newspapers as he ate, and he checked if Eye of Wisdom had placed an advertisement first. Based on his late-night thoughts from yesterday, Klein decided to have some fun today, so he considered whether he should go to a concert, an opera, or a play. The tickets to many of the music halls in the Westboro, Hillstonboro, and Cherwoodboro are at least 6 soldi, and if it's a famous musician, then they would even be on the order of pounds. Music halls specially catered to common folk range from 6 to 9 pence. Those that are open to the poor with money to spare in East Borough only need 1 pence. Klein flipped through the relevant materials to select his choice of entertainment for the day. At that moment, he heard the doorbell ring. Ding dong! Chapter 402, Digging.
Who is it?
Klein jerked his head up to look at the door. He felt as if he were suffering from an illness. The fear of hearing the doorbell ring was identical to the symptoms he had experienced on Earth, being afraid of his cell phone's ringing. Putting down the newspaper and magazine, he looked at the empty plate which had been cleaned even of its seasonings. Then he stood up, and he walked to the door. Before he got a hold of the handle, he already knew that it was Dr. Aaron outside. Klein mumbled as he opened the door.
Don't you need to work? Good morning, Aaron. The fog is gray today.
He smiled. Aaron was still wearing his cold expression, but there was an additional sense of anxiety and fear written on his face. He nudged his gold-rimmed spectacles and, without bothering to greet him, bluntly said,
Sherlock, I had another dream. I dreamed of Will Ossepton again.
Ah? Klein almost froze.
That's not right. The real paper crane is with me, above the gray fog, while the one I folded is with the nighthawks. You're still able to dream of Will Ossepton with a paper crane which was poorly folded by a nighthawk? That's not scientific. No, that doesn't make mystical sense.
Klein became serious and asked,
The same dream?
No, it's not that scary this time.
Aaron became a little calmer.
I dreamed about the grim cemetery. You know of it, right?
Klein answered simply,
Yes.
Back then, he had caught a group of students and a mysticism enthusiast who was a complete beginner, Kapusky, engaging in a spiritual dance outside Grimm Cemetery. He later received another copper whistle from the latter, which could be used to summon a messenger. Aaron drew a deep breath of cold air and continued.
I dreamed of the woods outside Grimm Cemetery. I dreamed of a birch tree, which had a layer of bark peeled off its trunk. Will Ossepton was sitting underneath that tree, looking at me quietly.
Klein pressed.
And then?
Aaron shook his head.
The dream ended there.
What a strange matter. Has Dr. Aaron's dream got nothing to do with the paper crane? No, if it wasn't related, then there wouldn't have been a situation where the dream changed after the paper crane was switched. Furthermore, I also performed a divination using the paper crane above the gray fog, and obtained the corresponding revelations.
Klein said in a measured voice.
This is no longer within my scope of understanding. What do you want from me, Aaron?
Aaron breathed out warm air that dispersed into white mist.
I want to pay a visit to the area outside Grimm Cemetery. I want to do it now, while it's still daytime. Can you protect me? I'll pay you £1.
Heading over to the place that appeared in the dream now, he probably wouldn't encounter anything too strange during the day.
Klein thought for a moment and said,
I can accept this request, but I suggest that you go back to the same cathedral and tell your dream to the bishop you're familiar with.
Aaron agreed, then said doubtfully,
Why do you always suggest that I go to the cathedral? I know, you've explained it before, in a very logical way, that if mystical powers exist in this world, then the churches, which have been leading humanity, must be the ones with the strongest mystical powers. And if there are none, then at least we can go to the church to get psychological comfort and corresponding connections. However, why do you suggest that I go to the cathedral for something that isn't considered too strange?
Klein considered for 2 seconds, then replied seriously,
I'm a detective. I've come into contact with a lot of unusual things, so I understand the special nature of the church. I also know when to ask for help.
Really?
Aaron listened with a serious expression, the corners of Klein's mouth curled up.
Just kidding. Take it easy, Aaron. I'm going to change my clothes first. And also do the dishes.
Having chatted with Aaron at the door for a long time without his thick coat, he turned rather stiff from the cold winds. Taking this opportunity, Klein went to the washroom, went above the gray fog, and divined the degree of danger for this mission. He received the answer that there was almost no risk. If he received a revelation indicating that it was dangerous, his plan was to reject the mission using the Church of Evernight as an excuse. Hillston Borough, Myriad Star Cathedral. Aaron asked, as he led Klein to the Church of Evernight's largest cathedral in Hillston Borough.
Sherlock, why don't you hire a maid? As a great detective, you can afford to have several servants.
This was something that he had wanted to ask while in the carriage, but he had never found the opportunity to change the subject. Klein sighed and said heavily,
Aaron, let me tell you a story. There was a detective who hired 2 maids, a cook, and an assistant, and he was doing pretty well, but one day he took over a case and successfully homed in on the murderer, who was a very savage and cruel man. He sneaked into the detective's house with the intention of revenge. The detective was a fighting expert, and in the end he was only slightly injured, but 2 of his servants died because of him. Do you get it, Aaron?
I see.
Aaron's voice had a hint of empathy.
Sherlock, I never knew that you've had such an experience.
No, the main character has nothing to do with me. I just made up a story. It's not like I can tell you directly that I'm involved in many strange and mystical matters, and that there will always be unspeakable secrets in my house, so that it's best I don't hire any servants.
Klein looked forward and let out a long sigh. The cleaning of his home was done twice a week, mostly by Mistress Stellan Sammer's maid. She was responsible for the most basic cleaning procedures, and each cleaning cost 1 solely. While they were talking, the 2 of them had already entered the hall of the Myriad Star Cathedral. It was dark, quiet, and devoid of candles, completely in line with the Church of Evernight's style. At the very front of the hall was an altar engraved with a dark sacred emblem. The stars were inlaid with self-illuminating pearls, and the crimson moon was made of rubies. The rest of the hall was filled with the darkness of the night. With a single glance, he could see that the place was filled with specks of light as the crimson light illuminated the area, making the place extremely sacred. But Klein felt that this was inferior to the design used by St. Selena Cathedral in Tingen. That hall was pitch black with only light penetrating from the front through the fist-sized holes. It resembled a starry sky, making one feel awe from the bottom of one's heart.
However, there's a problem with that kind of design. At night, the effect would be gone.
Klein took a seat at random, took off his half-top hat, and leaned on his black hardwood cane, while Aaron continued down the aisle to the confessional in search of the bishop. Sitting in such a large hall and looking at the people who were concentrating on praying, Klein's heart suddenly became tranquil.
Come to think of it, this is only my third time entering the goddess's cathedral.
He let out a self-deprecating laugh. Inside the Cathedral of Serenity at Winter County, Leonard Mitchell put on his black trench coat and red gloves and entered the room of the high-ranking deacon, Crestit Sesamir. Sesamir drew a crimson moon on his chest.
Congratulations, you have officially become a red glove. May the goddess bless you.
He still had his mouth covered with his high collar. Leonard raised his right hand and gestured 4 points in a clockwise fashion.
Praise the lady. The honor is mine.
Sesamir didn't say anything else and went straight to the point.
According to your request, I've placed you in Soest's team. He's a soul assurer and possesses a mystical item. I've already ordered someone to prepare a beyonder weapon for you that you'll need. Your team will be in charge of a devil summoning case, and you'll take into consideration certain clues to perform the search. For example, cases that have happened consecutively in Backland and matters related to a tarot ritual.
Yes, Reverend Sesamir.
Leonard held no objections towards the mission.
This will be the beginning of my revenge.
He silently said to himself. Westboro, in the periphery of Grim Cemetery. Klein accompanied Dr. Aaron as they took quite a while to walk around the nearby woods, coughing from time to time as a result of the falling grayish-white dust.
Maybe there isn't a tree like that. Dreams can't fully reflect reality.
Towards the end of the search, even Aaron was feeling a little uncertain himself.
Fortunately, I'm good at finding things.
Klein pointed with his cane and said,
Let's take a look over there and make it our final effort.
All right.
Aaron gasped for a breath of air. After a short walk, Aaron suddenly stopped and said, while pointing diagonally ahead,
Over there, over there.
About a dozen meters away, a birch tree with a strip of bark around its trunk stripped off stood there quietly, as if it were waiting for them. Aaron said with conviction,
It's identical to the one in my dream.
Klein smiled and said with some vigilance,
But there's no Will Septon.
Aaron got close to the birch tree, frowned for a while, then he suddenly pointed to the side of the tree and said,
Back then, Will Septon was sitting here, and he was pointing at the mud below him with his finger.
Pointing at the mud below him? Klein stood at the side, looking down at the almost unwithered grass.
You want to dig it up?
Aaron nodded.
We've already found this place, so we should confirm what's here. Sherlock, go to the cemetery and borrow 2 shovels.
Klein said cautiously,
It's better if I stay here. You go to the cemetery, I'm worried something might happen to you.
All right.
Aaron didn't refuse, and he immediately left the forest. After a while, after offering some money, he returned with 3 shovels and a tombkeeper, and they began to dig. While Klein was digging, he suddenly smelled something familiar. As the soil on the surface parted, the things below were gradually exposed. It was the body of a child that was already greatly rotten. His skin and flesh looked as if they were about to melt, and many bugs crawled in and out of his nose and mouth. Clang! The shovel fell from Aaron's hand and hit a rock. He pointed to the legs of the corpse, his mouth moving frantically, but he was unable to say a word. Klein endured the nausea and looked closely, discovering that the child's left leg was obviously missing its lower half. At the same time, Aaron took 2 steps back and fell to the ground, shouting sharply,
Will Septon! Will Septon!
It was Will Septon's corpse. Chapter 403, The Fate of a Private Detective.
He's dead? Will Septon is dead? And he seems to have been dead for some time. Could this be fake?
Klein looked at the body of the child in surprise and suspicion as many thoughts bubbled in his mind. From what he knew, Will Ossepton was a special child who could be involved with a sequence 1 of the monster pathway, Snake of Mercury, in some way. In the divination game he played, a casual doctor, your luck will get worse, was enough to make Aaron suffer from bad luck for an extended period of time. The paper crane he folded allowed Aaron's astral projection to be located in the spirit world and be instilled with artificial revelations. Even above the gray fog, Klein only received an inkling of his location and couldn't come to an effective conclusion.
How could such a child die for no reason? He was dead before Dr. Aaron's dreams? What about his family?
Klein narrowed his eyes, and despite his intense nausea, he carefully examined the highly rotten body. He noticed some torn tarot cards in the surrounding soil. His spiritual intuition told him that the corpse in front of him was most likely Will Ossepton.
It's really shocking and difficult to understand. I should go above the gray fog later and confirm if it's a fake death from Will Ossepton. Wait, what does this have to do with me? I had already decided not to get involved in this matter any further, in case I get entangled by some Snake of Mercury. This might be even more terrifying than sealed artifact 008.
Klein snapped out of his daze and said to the terrified tombkeeper and Dr. Aaron, who was on the verge of a mental breakdown,
Call the police.
Okay.
The tombkeeper was taken aback at first before he repeated his reply. With the shovel in hand, he turned and ran out of the woods at a speed that was so fast that it appeared as though he was being chased by a zombie.
As expected, he's just an ordinary person and isn't cautious at all. In this kind of situation, shouldn't he be wary of the people around him who might have malicious intent? By exposing your back, it would be easy for you to be hit by a shovel.
Klein glanced at the back of the tombkeeper and shook his head with a sigh. When he was a Nighthawk in Tingen, he had read a lot of case files and found out that many of the victims had ended up becoming victims of their companions. Thinking of this, Klein walked to Dr. Aaron, bent down, and stretched out his hand.
There's nothing to be afraid of. He's already dead.
It's the death that scares me.
Aaron calmed down a bit, and without accepting Klein's help, he got up by himself. His black frock coat was covered with dirt, and Klein felt his heart pain for the clothes for some baffling reason.
I'm the kind of person who can't stand seeing anything valuable get damaged.
He inwardly sighed with emotion, noticing that Aaron was still panicking. Klein laughed and said,
At such times, praying to the deity you believe in has quite a remarkable effect.
Is that so?
Aaron was stunned. He tapped his chest 4 times in a clockwise manner and chanted softly,
The Evernight Goddess stands higher than the cosmos and more eternal than eternity. Your devout believer prays for your blessing.
After repeating this over and over again, he gradually calmed down, no longer feeling as terrified as before. Klein drew a triangular sacred emblem on his chest and silently whispered to himself,
God of steam and machinery, your completely unfaithful believer, is begging for your blessings.
As he spoke, he couldn't help but laugh at himself, suspecting that he might be smote to death by lightning on the spot.
However, lightning and thunder belong to the Lord of Storms, and it isn't in the domain of the God of steam and machinery.
Klein thought in a relaxed manner. After about 20 minutes, the two of them found themselves sitting in an interrogation room at a nearby police station. During the testimony, Klein frankly informed the police that he was a private investigator who wasn't too sure of what was happening. As for Dr. Aaron, he described his dream in detail as the reason for digging to find the body. Klein could tell that the police didn't believe him at all, but after they had gone out for a while, they immediately changed their attitudes, saying that there was nothing suspicious about Dr. Aaron and Detective Moriarty. All they had to do was sign their statements and leave. Aaron was surprised, but Klein wasn't surprised. It was obvious that the Nighthawks had been involved. The advantage of having the doctor head to the Myriad Star Cathedral in advance was demonstrated. Before leaving the police station, Klein wasn't surprised to see a familiar figure. It was the Nighthawk who had entered his dream earlier. The man on duty, who was probably a captain, was still wearing a gray trench coat and was obviously more resistant to the cold than Klein. His blue eyes swept past Klein's face without any signs of abnormality, pretending to be an ordinary senior inspector. Klein, who was also pretending to be an ordinary private detective, nudged his glasses, put on half-top hat, and left the station with Dr. Aaron in a carriage. After instructing his carriage driver to head to Minsk Street first, Aaron turned to Klein and said,
Sherlock, do you think this will be the end of it?
If that body really belongs to Will Septon, then you shouldn't be troubled any longer.
Klein paused and continued.
Aaron, have you found anything else that's strange during this period of time, regardless of what it is?
Aaron thought about it and shook his head.
No.
This is worth celebrating.
Klein sighed and said with a smile. To him, this was the best way things could end with Will Septon's matter. Although the paper crane Klein had folded above the gray fog wouldn't reveal anything, and there would be no problems with any divination afterward, he was still a little worried that some nighthawk would suddenly think of something and use it to find some clues. And with the death of Will Septon, the case might soon reach a dead end, put in the archives, and temporarily declared a closed case. No one would pay any more attention to it without any new developments. Aaron relaxed and asked suspiciously,
Frankly, I don't think my statement was very convincing. Why did the cops choose to believe it in the end?
I don't know either.
Klein feigned puzzlement and said,
I thought I'd have to get my lawyer to take me home again. No, bail me out.
Aaron smirked and said,
Sherlock, you seem to have a lot of experience in being sent to the police station.
Klein laughed and replied in a deep voice,
It's the fate of every private detective.
Just as Klein and Aaron were being taken to the police station near Grimm Cemetery, Forr's Wall was wearing a long black dress and a black bonnet with a fine mesh hanging down. She entered the silent cemetery and found the grave of Mrs. Elisa. She and Shio had gone to Empressboro an hour ago to visit Viscount Glaint, and they had successfully gotten a verbal agreement for borrowing £400 without any interest. Viscount Glaint's only request was that the two Beyonders accompany him to the gathering Mr. A would convene tonight to ensure his safety. He was anxious to procure a royal jellyfish's venom crystal so that he could complete the concoction of the apothecary potion. Audrey had found the horn of an adult flying unicorn in the family treasury, and she had taken one out in the name of doing a biological experiment, effectively offsetting part of her debt. She also put forward an additional condition for Viscount Glaint to get the help of Duke Negan's children, to confirm if the dragon specimens in the treasury had a thousand-faced hunter and whether there were still light dots flashing inside. When the loan was settled, Forrest was in no hurry to pray to Mr. Fool to close the deal as quickly as possible, because it would make CO intuitively turn suspicious if things developed too quickly. Taking advantage of her free time, she changed her clothes and rented a horse carriage to get to Grimm Cemetery, which was located on the outskirts of Westboro. Knowing the law of Beyonder characteristics, conservation, and indestructibility, Forrest realized that the main ingredient that turned her into an apprentice was the Beyonder characteristic left behind by Mrs. Elisa. In a way, she had inherited her powers. Therefore, she couldn't help but pay a visit and put a bouquet of flowers in front of Mrs. Elisa's grave and thank her. It was early winter, and most of the flowers had long since withered, but Forrest still bought a handful of plain flowers. These flowers were grown in a greenhouse and were quite expensive. Forrest said inwardly in a most sincere manner,
Thank you, Emperor Roselle, for your invention.
As far as she knew, most of the flowers that the nobles used for their winter banquets came from greenhouses, while a tiny portion was delivered directly from the warm south by airships. This was more than the average middle-class worker could bear. Standing in front of the black tombstone, Forrest took a deep look at the photograph of Mrs. Elisa before bending down to lay down the flowers and whispered,
Thank you.
She immediately straightened up, closed her eyes, and quietly recalled the past. At this moment, she heard a slightly aged voice.
You really are a good and kind-hearted lady.
Forrest opened her eyes and turned her head, realizing that Mr. Lawrence from the Abraham family had also appeared there at some point. He was also holding a bouquet of plain but elegant flowers in his hand.
No, this is not goodness, nor is it kindness. Mrs. Alyssa once gave me, a person who had lost her mother, an unforgettable period of warmth.
Forbes said sincerely. Her eyes were suddenly moist. Lawrence, who only had wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, put down the flowers and sighed.
This shows that you value relationships.
After chatting for a while, when Forbes was about to leave, Lawrence, who was waving her goodbye, suddenly began to cough violently. Cough, cough, cough! He coughed until his legs buckled and fell to the ground. It seemed as if he would die at any moment from suffocation. As a doctor who had graduated from an accredited school, Forbes didn't hesitate to turn around, crouch down, and begin performing first aid. After a while, Lawrence's condition finally stabilized. He wiped the saliva from the corner of his mouth and smiled at Forbes.
Lady, can you take me back to the hotel?
No problem.
Forbes helped him to his feet. Lawrence looked ahead, his eyes a little out of focus. He coughed lightly, and he said with a sad and self-deprecating laugh,
My life might be coming to an end.
Chapter 404, Entrust. Westboro Carl Penza Hotel. Forbes helped Lawrence into his room and laid him down on the bed. It was a rather luxurious hotel, with thick, soft, grayish-yellow carpets everywhere except the washroom. On the walls hung imitations of famous oil paintings. Lawrence gasped for air and said,
Thank you, Miss Wall, and please forgive a dying man for not being able to bow.
No, Mr. Lawrence. Your problem has eased. As a former medical doctor, I can tell you without a doubt that you can still live. After some rest, we'll go to a clinic or a hospital.
Forbes consoled him. Lawrence smiled.
I know my physical condition very well. You don't have to comfort me. Besides, I'm an amateur astrologer. I already had a premonition that I'm going to die in this hotel in Backland.
Aside from some superficial concealment, everything he said was the truth. He was already close to 80, and he was no longer that robust and spirited young man from before. If not for the sequence potions that elevated his constitution, he might have already been buried in some random cemetery. Originally, Lawrence thought he could live for another 10 years, but who would have thought that he would encounter a rebellion caused by the former traveler Bodis? He suffered relatively serious injuries at the hands of the Aurora Order, and his remaining descendants all died in that disaster. This dealt him a great blow, and he almost didn't manage to recover from it. The search for his brothers and their descendants in Backland had only resulted in him receiving news of their deaths, dealing him a significant blow to his mental well-being once more. Compounded by all these things, Lawrence clearly felt that his life had come to an end. His initial plan was to return to the graves of Laubero and Alisa again and present a bouquet of flowers. He would then return immediately and meet with the other members of the Elder Council to set things in order before his death, but being an elderly man, his condition was beyond his control. Without waiting for a response from Forbes, Lawrence struggled to retrieve a palm-sized notebook from the inside pocket of his half-open coat. The hard paper cover of the notebook was bronze green, giving off a very ancient feeling. On its surface, the words, "I came, I saw, I record," was written in ancient Fasak. Lawrence placed the notebook on the quilt in front of his chest and took a deep breath.
Miss Wall, if I die here, can you help me send it to Pritz Harbor?
Mr. Lawrence, you'll be fine.
Forbes emphasized. At the same time, she subconsciously glanced at the notebook and found that it wasn't thick at all. There were a total of 3 types of papers inside, one of which was a yellow type of parchment, which had very few pages. The other was yellowish-brown goatskin, and the number of pages was in the middle of the range. The last was comprised of ordinary white paper and was the most common. Lawrence laughingly said with great difficulty,
I mean, Miss Wall, will you help?
Pritz Harbor isn't far. It's not even a trip. If it needs to be rushed, then I can even make the round trip in half a day by taking the steam locomotive.
Forbes nodded. Lawrence breathed a sigh of relief as his mind seemed to recover a little.
After I die, wait 10 minutes. Retrieve the glowing object from my body, and then send it along with this notebook to Dorian Gray at the Pritz Harbor's Fishermen Association. The 42 pounds in cash in my wallet will be the reward and my gratitude. As for these clothes of mine, let it turn to ash along with me.
No, you don't need to give me anything. No, you'll be fine, Mr. Lawrence.
Forrest said earnestly. As if he hadn't heard her, Lawrence whispered to himself.
Maybe Dorian will give you additional rewards, but it depends on you. I believe you. For Melissa's matter, I can tell that you're a good girl.
He suddenly seemed to turn lucid as he said to Forrest,
Ms. Wall, can you go down to the first floor and bring me a jug of water? I don't know when the waiter will come over.
No problem.
Without thinking, Forrest took a water jug and walked out of the room. After walking a few steps, she suddenly felt that something was amiss. The water jug in her hand was heavy, and there was obviously a lot of water in it. Just as she was about to turn around and ask, she suddenly sensed a strong fluctuation of spirituality in the room. That was. For a moment, Forrest froze, and then she understood what Mr. Lawrence was trying to do. As death approached, he could clearly sense that something was wrong with his body. He was afraid of losing control and turning into a monster. He wanted to die as a human, not a monster, so he chose to end his own life. That was the last form of decency for a Beyonder. Of course, if he had turned into a monster, all his plans would have come to naught. With this in mind, Forrest became dejected. She waited outside for nearly 10 minutes before she pushed open the door and entered. She saw Lawrence lying silently on the bed, looking like he had aged considerably. Beside him was a diamond the size of an eye. The light which shone in through the window was constantly refracted by the diamond, forming a scene as beautiful as the radiance of the stars. Forrest sighed and performed a careful examination. She found that the cause of Lawrence's death was the most ordinary form of cardiac arrest. Chairwood Borough, 15 Minsk Street. Klein rested for a while after getting home. He then went above the gray fog, having plans to divine the situation with Will Ossepton. He had the paper crane fly out of the trash pile in the corner and made it land on the long bronze table in front of him. Then he took out the topaz pendant that was wrapped around his sleeve. As he held the spirit pendulum in his left hand, Klein used cogitation to adjust his condition before recalling the scenes he had seen in the woods outside the cemetery. He might not have noticed some of the details, but it was certain that his spirituality wouldn't miss any. This divination was mainly about using this point and relying on the gray fog to eliminate all distractions. After finishing his preparations, Klein took out a goatskin parchment and wrote the divination statement, Will Ossepton is completely dead. Then he pressed the paper crane next to the divination sentence, almost causing the topaz pendant to touch the words. After entering a state of cogitation and completing all the steps of the spirit dowsing, Klein opened his eyes and looked at the result. The topaz pendant was rotating counterclockwise at a fast frequency and high amplitude. It was a negative result. That meant that Will Ossepton wasn't completely dead. Klein was surprised, but it seemed to be within his expectations. He thought for a moment. Then he changed the divination statement. That corpse was Will Ossepton's. This time, the spirit pendulum gave a positive result. The body did belong to Will Ossepton. An idea came to Klein's mind, and he wrote a new divination statement. Will Ossepton's corpse will resurrect. After a few moments of calmly performing the divination, Klein saw the revelation. The pendulum was rotating counterclockwise with a fast frequency. That meant that Will Ossepton's corpse wouldn't be resurrected, or in other words, no reanimations. It looks like Will Ossepton had voluntarily or was forced to abandon his previous body, and he is surviving in another way. This matter has something to do with the Snake of Mercury? Klein tried to divine additional information, but he failed repeatedly, including the statement, Will Ossepton's present state. However, he repeated the divination using dream divination and inquired Will Ossepton's current location. He received a similar scene, a dark room with the sound of running water. However, the feeling it gave him seemed to be a little different.
Forget it, there's no need to waste any more time on this. I'm not planning to get involved anyway.
Klein put away his spirit pendulum and prepared to return to the real world. Through the prior divination and everything that had happened before, he had a theory about Will Ossepton, but he couldn't confirm it. He suspected that Will Ossepton was another Snake of Mercury, as a Sequence 1 A snake of Mercury wasn't the only one. There could be up to 3 in existence at the same time. The snake of fate, who wielded destiny naturally, could locate Aaron's astral projection through the paper crane and show him a false revelation. Without a doubt, it also had the ability to change a person's fate. For some reason, Will Alcepton had become weak and was under the threat of the second snake of Mercury. Everything he did was to escape his counterpart. As for the reason for their conflict, the answer was simple. Without a sequence 0, there could be 3 sequence 1s at the same time, but once there was a sequence 0, there would be no sequence 1s. Regarding this sentence, the formula of the Black Emperor potion clearly stated the truth. One of the main ingredients of the recipe was 2 Beyonder characteristics of a Prince of Abolition. Prince of Abolition was sequence 1 of the Black Emperor pathway. As a sequence 1, if one wanted to advance to sequence 0, then one had to obtain all the Beyonder characteristics of the other 2 sequence 1s of the same pathway. With this guess in mind, Klein was increasingly afraid of getting involved with Will Alcepton's case.
If my deduction is correct, it would be a genuine fight between deities, and I can't afford to get myself involved.
Klein's spirituality descended, and he disappeared from the ancient palace above the gray fog. In Empress Borough, in an inconspicuous house, the Beyonder gathering, organized by Mr. A, proceeded as scheduled. Fors and Shio had changed their clothes, and they accompanied Viscount Glaint, who was wearing an iron-black mask, into the hall. They randomly chose a seat and sat down. Viscount Glaint wrote down his needs to the attendants before the gathering officially began. He also prayed to the goddess that there would be a response later. As usual, Fors maintained her usual languidness and, in a rare instance, covered herself with a hood, concealing her face with the shadows. She was thinking about the situation with Mr. Lawrence. She knew very clearly what that diamond the size of an eye was. It was a Beyonder characteristic left behind by him. However, for the time being, she was unable to confirm what sequence it belonged to. Fors had casually flipped through the notebook, only to find that many of the pages were still blank. The written content was filled with all sorts of strange, odd, and mysterious symbols and magic labels, exceeding whatever she knew.
What it is isn't important. What's important is that I keep my promise.
Fors warned herself. At this moment, Mr. A, who was seated on a 1 sofa and was wearing an exaggerated hood, said hoarsely,
I have a mission. Help me find people who believe in the so-called fool.
Ah?
Fors instantly snapped back to her senses. Chapter 405, Cult.
The fool?
The Beyonders who attended Mr. A's gathering either ruminated over the phrase or conversed with their companions to discuss whether they had ever met anyone who had a similar faith. Someone asked, in a low voice,
When did such a cult appear?
At this point, Mr. A made the attendant beside him hold up a blackboard with a few lines of words written in the Loan language. The fool that doesn't belong to this era. The mysterious ruler above the gray fog. The king of yellow and black who wields good luck. As the attendees examined the blackboard, Mr. A said in a hoarse and jarring voice,
Do not use Hermes to read what's written here, even more so for Jotun, Elvish, Dragonese, and Ancient Hermes. You shouldn't even write the corresponding descriptions. Otherwise, there is a high probability that something terrible will happen. Help me find believers in the fool. Of course, they might also be followers of the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, or the king of yellow and black who wields good luck. As long as there's a clue, inform me immediately. The reward I'll provide will be so handsome that it will far exceed your imagination.
A gathering member exclaimed,
This description. It sounds like an incredible existence. I've only seen similar descriptions in the ancient texts of the 7 gods.
His companion shook his head and said,
The beings which many cults believe in have similar descriptions.
The other gathering members were stunned when they heard their discussion.
Is it really a cult?
A gathering member who was well-versed in mysticism gave an explanation.
Likely. Typically, when we summon a creature from the spirit world, we might have 3 lines describing it, but one of the lines would be about the blessed one of someone, or that who belongs to. It wouldn't be in this format.
As they vehemently conversed, Fors was nearly dumbfounded.
Isn't that the honorific name of Mr. Fool? Even though it's described in the Loan language, I'm sure of it. Why would Mr. A want to find the believers of Mr. Fool? Is the Aurora Order behind this?
Fors's mind was in a mess. She knew that Mr. A was a member of the Aurora Order because of a particular terrorist organization had announced its responsibility in the assassination of Intis Ambassador Bakerland. After a brief moment of astonishment, Fors subconsciously began to examine herself, afraid that someone would discover that she was already a member of the Tarot Club and that, in some sense, she was a blessed of the Fool.
I just recited the honorific name of the Fool according to the ancient Hermes on that piece of paper and was pulled above the gray fog. No one knows about this, and I don't have to be afraid of being investigated. But there's a link to that piece of paper with Mr. Fool's honorific name written on it. It was hidden in a book we borrowed from the Viscount Glaint.
Thoughts rapidly flashed through Fors's mind.
The Fool that doesn't belong to this era. Isn't that the description I saw on that piece of paper? I even dreamed of an evil spirit.
At the same time, Shio remembered the incident that had frightened her, but her long experience as a bounty hunter had kept her from revealing anything unusual. And then, as she recalled, she thought about the origin of the piece of paper.
It was hidden in the bookcase of History of the Loan Kingdom's Aristocracy. That book was borrowed from Viscount Glaint's study.
Suddenly, a name flashed in both Fors's and Shio's minds at the same time, Viscount Glaint. At that moment, Viscount Glaint was looking at the blackboard and said to himself with interest,
"This honorific name is very rare, but it sounds very impressive."
Just as he finished his sentence, he looked to his side in puzzlement, asking Fors and Shio,
"Why are you looking at me like that?"
Nothing.
Nothing.
Shio and Fors rapidly shook their heads at the same time. After dinner, in an elegantly decorated house, Audrey brought the huge golden retriever Susie into the living room under the guidance of her psychology teacher Escalante. She was attending the academic meeting that had been agreed upon last week. Her maid and bodyguard stayed behind while she walked with Susie into a spacious activity room. In the activity room, be it for the atmosphere or some other reason, the gas lamps were not lit. The room was lit by gold-plated candle lamps on the coffee table and cupboard. Before Audrey could take a good look at her surroundings, she saw a gentleman in his 30s walking towards her. He wore a gray tailcoat. The long-haired Escalante introduced him.
"This is the owner of this place, Mr. Stephen Hampress, a furniture merchant."
She was just about to tell him Audrey's identity when Hampress chuckled and said,
"Escalante, don't say anything. Let me have a chance at guessing."
He had a neatly trimmed mustache and charming dark brown eyes. He appeared very gentle and elegant, nothing like a furniture merchant, but more like a university lecturer. After seriously sizing up Audrey a few times, he smiled and said,
Escalante only mentioned that you were her student. Heh. I believe you're a cultured, noble lady, and you aren't someone who only looks good. There's no need for you to worry about a decline in the quality of your life. You're a little excited, very curious, and are relatively simple but also full of love. Of course, the most obvious point is that you're very beautiful, just like an angel.
Made a final joke, pressed his hand to his chest, bowed and said,
"Welcome, the beautiful Miss Angel."
You're right, as expected of a member of the Psychology Alchemists. However, what you managed to observe was the me from a few months ago. It's all a facade I've put on for myself.
Audrey opened her mouth in surprise and astonishment.
Did you know me before, Mr. Hampress?
She didn't let her shocked expression linger too long on her face, because such emotions were meant to be instantaneous and wouldn't last too long. If anyone were to be surprised for several seconds, then it meant that their performance was most likely an act. Audrey didn't notice this at first, but after watching others act all this time, she naturally came up with a lot of rules. Hampress chuckled.
No, I still don't know you. This is just the basics of being a psychology enthusiast.
Before he could finish his sentence, Audrey had already completed her observations and made a corresponding judgment based on her surroundings.
His attire and the furnishings of his house all indicate that he's a person who cares deeply about how people view him. The sapphire on the ring of his left hand doesn't look small, but its actual quality is very ordinary. There are no symbols or magic labels on it. His finances aren't as good as he presents them to be. He's vain. Even though he was very enthusiastic just now, the way he stands there, the direction in which his feet point, and the changes in his emotional colors all indicate that he still has many concerns and is on his guard. He sincerely commended me on my looks, but it wasn't in the way a man would look at a woman. There are signs of him using facial products, and his eyebrows are definitely drawn. His skills are inferior to my makeup maidservant Solia, but they're better than mine. The cologne he uses is confusion, something that I've only seen women use before. Yes, he probably likes men, and the role he plays is the weaker one in the relationship.
At the same time, Audrey expressed her longing skillfully.
I'd love to have your observational powers, Mr. Humphreys.
As she spoke, she maintained a faint smile while being introduced to the other 7 or 8 people in the activity room under Humphreys and Escalante's lead. The lovers of both mysticism and psychology were either descendants of fallen aristocrats, associate professors at universities, or the children of the rich. For example, the father of a young man was the owner of Philip's department store, the most famous department store in Backland. In the exchange that followed, Audrey basically only listened. The only time she spoke was by asking questions, fully expressing her curiosity and yearning. In this academic discussion, Escalante and Humphreys deliberately mentioned the body of heart and mind, as well as the spirit world and the collective subconscious. They also shared some relatively unique points of view, allowing Audrey to gradually understand some of the questions she had accumulated all this time. When the discussion ended and they were out of the house, Audrey glanced at Escalante beside her and asked with a little naivete,
Miss Escalante, when will I be as good in psychology as Mr. Humphreys?
Escalante curled the corners of her lips and slightly tilted her head as she looked at her.
Very soon.
At night, Klein, who was about to get into bed, once again appeared above the gray fog. Despite being a little sleepy, he was jolted awake by the news Miss Magician had reported.
The Aurora Order knows of the Fool. They know of my honorific name. The true Creator has locked onto me.
Klein abruptly sat up straight, as though he was about to face an attack. He quickly rejected the final theory. If the true Creator had indeed locked onto him, Mr. A would have long visited him on the pretext of collecting a copper penny for the gas meter. Perhaps even a saint might appear.
That is to say, only the Fool and his corresponding honorific name are known, and the clues point to Backland. Who leaked the news?
Klein frowned as he carefully thought about it. Soon he discovered a possibility.
Little Son has recently chanted my honorific name, and it happened when he was interacting with a member of the exploratory team who was corrupted by the true Creator. He held a sacrificial ritual, and there were likely symbols corresponding to the Fool at the scene. The ancient palace above the gray fog appeared. So the true Creator sensed the existence of the Fool and confirmed that I was the one who had been sacrilegious. No, harassing. No, that's not right either. Spying on him. Also, Little Son used the all-black eye at that time, which contains the mental corruption of the true Creator. Through that, he has confirmed that my blessed and believers are in Backland. I can't take the all-black eye out in the future.
Having roughly understood the problem, Klein was left with another problem.
Mr. A announced the bounty for Mr. Fool's believers at a not-so-private, relatively open Beyonder gathering. Is he just dumb, or is he deliberately fishing? Sigh. The Aurora Order members are all bigoted lunatics. Their brains are mostly damaged, so it's impossible to deduce their real intentions. This is, as the saying goes, as long as I'm crazy, you won't be able to guess what I'm thinking?